guys, welcome back to my channel. I have recently started a new writing project, which if you follow me on Instagram or Twitter, or even if you follow me here, you probably have heard me talk about this already. With my last book, I basically vlogged and talked my way through the second half of the first draft, as well as all of the revision processes and everything that went along with that. By the time I jumped into it and started really vlogging and talking to you guys openly about my writing and sort of my writing process and everything, I kind of just missed those first steps. So with this book, I'm gonna do it differently, and I'm going to start from the beginning and share with you guys a little bit more about my process. I will admit, I'm still kind of learning my own process. I think this is something that a lot of writers can relate to, especially if you write long projects like novels. I've written a total of 3 novels, and the first 2 had various problems, different problems from each other, and I'm just slowly getting better and better. But that also means that I haven't actually had that many complete new starts into projects, and this is the first one that I'm feeling really confident about, because I feel like with those 3 novels that I've written, I've learned so much about my writing process. I've learned so much about what works for me, what doesn't work for me. I've also just grown up and had a lot more time to read about writing and just to get more ideas in general. So I think this is probably gonna be the most successful start to a project that I've ever had. So what I thought I would do is walk you through sort of the process that I have been going through in starting this new idea. Obviously, it's gonna vary writer by writer what works and what doesn't work and how the story kind of unfolds. And even for me, every story that I've had, or every idea that I've had and started on that's become a story, has started differently, has progressed differently. Like I said, with every book, I think I learn more and more about what works for me, and I get better and better at refining that. So I think it'll be really interesting to share with you guys. I am 100% a computer writer. I know there are still a handful of people who like to write by hand, but I think most of us have gone away from that. Almost everything that I do is on my computer. So the thing that kind of kickstarted this entire project was I was sort of thinking I wanted to start something new. I had a few little baby ideas, but nothing that I really thought I wanted to actually create a story about. So I kind of pushed my mind down the creative path and just thought, what might be interesting? Little ideas came fleeting here and there. I made some notes. Nothing really stuck. Nothing felt like the story that I really wanted to actually delve into. And then one day, I had an idea, and that idea didn't seem so bad. So I kept thinking a little bit more about the idea, thought maybe this is something I should start taking notes for, and I wrote down kind of the premise. This has been consistent with all of the stories that I've had. It always starts the premise. Usually the premise is sort of tied in with a main character, but the main character is usually a little bit fuzzy still at the beginning. It's the premise of the story, a tiny bit of the world, a tiny bit of the plot idea, and a tiny bit of the character, but it's not really a fleshed out version of any of those things. So I had this premise, I wrote it down really quickly in the notes on my phone, and I started thinking more about it. And that is when the character kind of began to form in my head, the main character. I had some ideas about sort of what I wanted her to look like. I had some ideas about what her personality might be, what her character traits might be. And I really want to form a very full picture of this character before I delve too much into the story. I know I've talked about this one before, but one thing that I do that really helps me with bringing this character to life in my mind is finding pictures of an actual person to sort of be this character. And normally what I do for that is I find a young or an unknown, it doesn't have to be young, obviously, not all the characters are young, but an unknown actor or actress. And I find pictures of them that kind of match the tone that I want this character to be, and I actually save those pictures onto my computer and put them in the file, my character profile file for each one of these characters. I've talked about this before, but I use Evernote, so I have a notebook with multiple different notes, and each of my like important characters has a character profile note, and that's when I write down just everything that I possibly know about this character. So right now what I have, I will go through each one of these things, but like very briefly. I have their name, I have any nicknames that they have, and especially if certain characters have a nickname for someone, but it's not a general nickname, I need to mark that down. Notable facts, random facts, way of speaking. This is really important. Not every character will qualify for a strange accent or any strange habits when they speak or anything like that. Not everyone has to have a very unique way of speaking, otherwise it's just gonna get very confusing with all the different like dialects that you have in your book. But I think it's really important, especially for main characters, to have certain aspects of the way that they speak. This can be tone, maybe they talk really gravelly, they don't have, you know, very much expression, it's very monotone. Maybe they stutter, or if they have an accent, if they don't use contractions. I mean, anything like this that affects the way that you write their dialogue and the way that the readers need to be reading their dialogue is very important to mark down, and that's why I think it merits its own separate category. After that, I have basic information, so age, birthday, parents, family, any of their relatives, maybe any of their friends if that's particularly notable for the story. After that comes appearance, so hair, both color and texture, style, length, anything that could possibly come into play with their hair that I need to know. And even if this is not stuff that I necessarily go into great detail in the book, if it's not that important, I need to know this for myself. Eyes, skin, body, and prominent features, if they have freckles or a mole or a really big nose or a really tiny nose or anything like that that's prominent, those sorts of features that you probably will write into the book. Then I have characterization. So traits and features, habits and tics currently are the categories that I have, but of course I continually add things to this. Then this is a new one that I've added, development. So what I'm gonna try to do for all of my main characters is write their beginning state, so where they start in the book, sort of the beginning of their arc. This can be in the way that they act, this can be something going on in their life, just whatever's very important at the beginning of their story arc. Then needs to is the second category, so the challenges they need to overcome or the development that they're gonna have, what they're gonna learn, how they're gonna change throughout the book. And then the end, so then where do they leave off? And this doesn't have to be drastic for every character. Not every character has to go through this grand story arc, but I do think it's important to have that in mind, and that is something in my past stories that I think I just sort of went more instinctively for, and it sometimes worked, and it sometimes did not work. So I think this will probably help. So I have started doing this for my main character, 2 side characters, and I'm starting on the villain right now as well. I will admit that villains are not my specialty. I feel like with every one of my stories, it's where it's been lacking. As I've said multiple times, you know it by now, I am a planner. I'm a huge planner, and I think everything needs to be very detailed to have the best results for me. So throughout each one of my books, I figured out the stuff that I should have planned better at the beginning, and I'm fixing that now. Villain's one of those. I really do need to make sure I have a much fuller idea of the villain before I even start writing. So that's what I'm doing. Moving right along to the next very, very important thing to plan out and brainstorm, and that is the world. In my case, for this story, I'm not gonna give you spoilers again, but I have the real world and then I have fantasy world. This starts to sort of develop along with the characters, along with the premise, but it is something that I have to sit down and make myself brainstorm specific details as well, otherwise these things could get overlooked. What's really important in fantasy worlds is that you define the world in its present state, as well as at least a little bit of history, where the world come from, if there's a connection with the real world and the fantasy world, how does that work, when did that happen, how does the interaction between the worlds happen, the rules of the world, if there's magic, which in my case there is a sort of magic, how does that work? What happens? What are the consequences of this and that? What are the limits of this magic? All of this is very, very important, and it's stuff that if you don't sit down and think about it and brainstorm and make notes, at least in my case, again, it's very likely to be a little bit flat. So it's really important that these details are written down. For this, my categories are a lot more vague because I have just a slew of details within each category. The first category being world details. I have so much stuff in there that eventually I'm probably gonna need to categorize into different aspects of the world details, but right now it's just all there. After that, I have a special category for the connection between the worlds. I have a separate bullet point for magic in my world. I'm still working on this, but I'm gonna have each of the different sort of sub places within my world, because my world sort of equals Earth. So I need to have different places, sort of countries, regions, or whatever. I haven't defined exactly what I want to call it, but certain places within my world. At the same time that all of this stuff is coming together and I'm brainstorming all of this stuff, of course, there is the plot, the actual plot of the story. Like I said before, I start with a premise, so I have an idea of where the plot will take me, but I have no idea the details. I'm missing so many things, and more than likely the end of the book, how the book's gonna end up, is still fuzzy if it's even slightly in vision at all. In this case, I am very much at the beginning of this story, so the plot is very much not there right now, and I am working on that currently. I'm starting to sort of write the first initial scenes, the ideas for the scenes, I mean, and I'm sort of seeing how I want the story to start. Maybe this is a little bit backwards since I haven't quite figured out the rest of the story. I do have sort of the antagonistic theme, and I know sort of how that's gonna work through the story, but I have really no idea how the adventure of the story is gonna work. But it really is a mix of all these things coming together. One sort of feeds off of the other. I'm working on my characters. That's one of the very first things that I started doing, is fleshing them out. But I can't fully flesh them out until I have the plot, and I definitely can't do the plot until I have the world defined. And they're all just sort of coming together at the same time, but I usually will work on them sort of one at a time. So I have an evening where today I'm just gonna work on my characters. I'm gonna flesh out one character or a couple of my characters, or I'm gonna define a couple new characters. And then I have a different day where it's all about the world. I'm just gonna search everything I can about this world, figure out what I want to be in it. Right now it's a lot of notes, it's a lot of what if this, what if that, sort of letting my mind run down all the different little rabbit trails and figure out which one I might want to take. It's all really exciting, honestly. I'd kind of forgotten the thrill and also how overwhelming it can be when you start an all new project. My last book I worked on for quite some time, and I think I kind of started to take for granted some of the things about my story and my plot and my world and all of that that were just defined in my head, and I'd forgotten what it felt like before I had those things defined and what the story felt like before I knew what the story was, if that makes sense. Now I just kind of feel like someone's pulled the rug out from under me. I'm starting with nothing. I'm starting completely with a blank slate. I'm really, really happy to be starting on this project, and I will be doing it in parallel with plotting out a sequel for my other book, which I'm completely not done with. I love that world. I love the book. We'll see sort of what happens going forward with it, but I'm not leaving it behind by any stretch. But I also want to stretch my creative muscles again and start working on something new at the same time. So there you have it. That's sort of how I'm starting this new book, a little bit about my process, a little bit about all the details that I go into. This might be especially interesting if you're not really a huge planner, or maybe if you're starting to become a planner. It's fun, I swear. I know it doesn't seem like we're having very much fun, but I promise you we are. There are tons of other things that I have done, that I am doing, and that I will be doing in the future that I haven't necessarily talked about in this video. This is by no means complete and comprehensive of everything that it takes to develop a story, but I hope this was interesting for you, maybe helpful for you. Let me know in the comments, first of all, if you're a plotter or a pantser, and second of all, what your sort of process is when you start a big new project. Thanks so much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.